It is the middle of the semester. Some of you are still preparing for your midterms, and some of you are getting ready to recover this weekend. You have so much going on in your lives. I actually think that Biola students are busier than most other students. You know all about work. Faculty know all about work. In addition to advising time, we have our own research, we have service on committees, we enjoy teaching, we will eventually have to grade those midterms that you've been working on. We're familiar with work as well. Parents, family members, you've done so much to get your children here, these students. So much that we can't even comprehend. You know all about work. Have you ever stopped to wonder, when we use the word work, what do we mean? Do you mean that it is a paid position? Do you mean that it is just simply required? Is it labor and toil? Is it naturally a positive word for you or possibly negative? Could it be fun? Could it be satisfying? As satisfying as that first sip of a white chocolate mocha, double shot, 2 pumps, non-fat, no whipped cream, or whatever your coffee preference is in the morning. Could work be worshipful? How about the term calling? What does that imply to you? When you think of the word calling, do you think of something that you were born with, that you were gifted in from the beginning? Do you think of it as something that needs to be discovered? Or is it something that develops along the way? Does the idea of calling stress you out or inspire you? However you approach it, the relationship between work and calling matters. Steve Jobs says this: your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to truly be satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. Now, I'm a communication theorist, and so I'm really fascinated by the kinds of words that we use and the meanings that we ascribe to them. In my organizational communication class, I have students read an article about a real job. What does a real job mean? We unpack these kinds of terms. Central to the quote above is this concept of work. And work is a funny thing because it means so many things to so many people in different ways. What one person finds incredibly dull or pointless, someone else finds incredibly interesting. You might have experienced that taking general education classes and finding your major and then realizing, wait a minute, some of these general education classes are totally interesting. Maybe I want to change my major. You do that a couple times. I changed mine 3 times. One thing is true though. However you look at it, how we define work ultimately impacts how we approach the rest of our lives. How you see work will impact the rest of the way you approach life. And so with that framework, I'd like to talk to you about 3 things. Now, work and calling is so juicy. We could talk about so many things. It's kind of like going to your favorite ice cream place, like Salt and Straw up in LA. I don't know if you've ever been there before. It's awesome. And when you go to a place like that, they let you take a couple of tastes. So this morning, we're going to take a couple of tastes. We won't be able to taste them all, but hopefully it'll give you a little flavoring. So here's the first thing I want to talk with you about this morning. I want to talk with you about the value of meaningful work. Why is work calling actually that important? I want to talk to you about the significance of recognizing that work calling is also a privilege. It's a privilege. And finally, I want to talk to you about the dark side. I want to talk to you about the stuff that's not so good when you approach work as a calling. So are you with me? You ready to dive in? Awesome, let's do it. So first thing first, why is meaningful work really that important? Well, there's lots of studies out there that talk about how we approach work, but also what happens in our work life. Recently, a study came out that says we will change jobs approximately 10 times between the ages of 18 and 42. That's not how it was with my parents when they were in their middle 20s. They usually stuck with the same job, but that's not the case anymore. And in fact, work as an adult will constitute a third of your life. A third of your life will be spent working. It might be important to find meaning there, right? So the thing about it is that meaningful work, more than any other approach to work, whether it's functional or you just feel good because you're using your skills, but meaningful work, that deep purpose, actually means that those people have a higher sense of motivation, satisfaction, well-being. They're more resilient during organizational change or economic downturn because there's this deep compelling. I don't know if you've ever felt called. Maybe you felt called to come to Biola. So even in the time of midterm heaviness, where your mind might feel almost paralyzed with burdens, if you felt called to be here, maybe that's getting you through. So they exist everywhere. You might think that calling exists only in some overtly ministry-oriented places, but they actually exist everywhere. I've interviewed people from all different spheres of life. I've interviewed CEOs, artists, hairstylists, athletes, stay-at-home parents, accountants, and their stories are powerful. I love stories. When I was a little kid, my favorite part in the day was actually the evening where I could choose books at the end of the day to read with my parents before I went to bed. I love stories. One of my favorites is a classic that kind of came into a film. It's the true life story of Eric Liddell, the Olympic gold medalist and missionary to China. Some of you might have seen this movie. It's an oldie, but a goodie. And for me, that first scene of these white men wearing white clothes with really white legs running across a gray beach, and if you've seen this movie, or maybe you even have heard the music, right? Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 right? So it gets you going. I even watched it last night just to rev up my heart a little bit. This story about this missionary who is also an athlete shows the tension that he's feeling with multiple callings and kind of being misunderstood for it. At one point, his sister, who's also a missionary, says, why are you choosing to run? Why are you choosing to participate in these Olympics? And he says, Ginny, God made me for a purpose, but he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel God's pleasure. So I watch this movie about every 3 years. I don't know if you have a movie like that, like Remember the Titans or The Blind Side or Rudy, where you just have to pull it out every now and then and feel inspired. But I remember watching it in graduate school and working part-time as a consultant. And I remember watching it in graduate school and personally thinking, wow, whatever I dedicate my life to, I want to feel that kind of meaning. And then professionally, I was thinking, I wonder how people who feel this way actually talk about it. In other words, are there patterns that exist among the way people who feel this way talk about it? And are there drawbacks? I always think, what's the drawback of this situation? What are the challenges? Social scientist and New York Times bestseller Brené Brown says this: stories are data with a soul. They are a thing to be studied. That's one of the reasons I love being a qualitative researcher. It's a gift. It's a gift to share in the life of another. Whenever I have the opportunity to meet students for coffee and hear your stories, it's a gift. Kind of two gifts, because there's coffee and then there's you, so I like both. But it's interesting to me, and so a few years later in my doctorate program, I began pursuing the idea of meaningful work, and I began interviewing people. Listen to what a few of my participants said about feeling called. One said, it's that kind of fire in your belly. Another, it's the type of work that feeds your soul. You wake up in the morning and you're looking forward to it. You go to bed at night and you're proud that you did it. Or, I love what I do. I don't play the lottery, but if I did and I won $10 million, I'd be doing this. I love what I do. I feel incredibly, unbelievably blessed. So think for a moment. Can you think through the haze of your exhaustion? What if you felt like this in the work that you did? what if you felt like this even now as a student? What would that do for your life? Now, one way that we talk about meaningful work, or that we can see it, is describing it as a calling. So actually, Christians use the term calling all the time, and a lot of times we don't necessarily use it appropriately, but it's there all around. If you start paying attention in pop culture, whatever your religious affiliation is, people use it to describe this deep, compelling. But what is it? It's more than a paycheck. It's more than being concerned about although a paycheck is important, by the way. You do need to survive. It's more than being concerned about your performance and job advancement. Here's what it involves. First thing, it involves this overarching meaningfulness to work. So again, not simply functional, but at the end of the day, you're like, wow, that was good. I made an impact. It also involves some kind of caller, right? So a calling implies being called, implies a caller. There's a relationship there. We know as Christians that the caller is the Lord. In John 10:27, we know that my sheep hear my voice. Caller is the Lord. Work also involves the integration of an individual's passion and skill set. One CEO said this, passion alone is not enough. When I asked her what kind of worker she was looking for, she said, passion alone is not enough. Passion makes a great fan. Passion and skill set produces a great worker. That's what you're here at college to do, to develop your skill set. So here's the deal. The integration of these two attributes, passion and skill set, address the need to be proactive in getting developed, right? You actually need to sharpen your skill. If you felt called to medicine, you wouldn't just on the first day go to the operating room and say, I'm ready, right? You would need training. Lastly, being called in the workplace involves a contribution to society. So it's not simply just a hobby for yourself, although that's good and that can be a worshipful act, but a calling communicates impacting others as well. So in this way, calling is inherently communication-based, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a communication scholar, right? At its very core, work calling bespeaks of a visceral interaction between a caller and a called. It's inherently interactional. It is a dynamic process. Let's talk about that. It's a process. Check this picture out. My dad sent this to me. He always sends me fun stuff that he knows I'm going to enjoy. Look at how much is happening underground. When you achieve success, it's because of all these other things you've had to do along the way. You don't spend enough time looking at the process. But work calling is a journey. I think we've sort of bought into this myth that a calling exists when the skies open up, the light pierces through the clouds, and you hear someone say, Sarah, this is your calling. Tim, this is your calling, right? Well, there are epiphany moments. Those do happen. But they happen along a journey. They happen along the way. And oftentimes those aha moments are actually in retrospect, right? So it's like you realize it after you're reflecting about it, not always in the moment. So pay attention to the little things. We're actually encouraged to do this. We're encouraged to make a careful exploration of who we are and the work we've been given, because it is about stewarding the gifts and opportunities God's given us, and then sinking ourselves into it, really being in it. When we recognize that the work calling is a process, it means that what you're doing right now, like actually in these seats right now, could be part of it. What you're learning at the university, through volunteering, through interning, getting a starting job where you feel like you are at the bottom of the food chain, could actually be part of the opportunity to sharpen your skills and clarify your passions. It's important. Now, more than just a process, it's important to recognize that experiencing work as a calling is a privilege. This is the second point. It's actually a privilege. Not everyone gets the opportunity to pursue work as a calling. Their general calling as Christians to love God and love others, we can do all the time. But that specific feeling of your work being in line with that. One Gallup consultant said this, there's plenty of people that just need a job. It's a privilege to be able to live in the realm of calling. Why? Why is it a privilege? Well, this is an important issue, and I'd love to come back and talk with you more about this because it's a complex answer. But certainly, issues like race, gender, socioeconomic status play a huge part in this because not everyone gets the opportunity. Not everyone gets the support. Doesn't mean they can't do it. Just means it's a privilege. There are also multiple callings. Maybe you really feel called to be a spouse and a parent. Maybe that's something that you dream about. You think about when you're in the car or you're washing your hair. You just feel called to do that. And so you feel called in the workplace, but you also feel called in this way, and you have to make a choice. So that's part of why it's a privilege too. It's complex. Now, it might be tempting as we're talking about all the juicy goodness, the motivation, the satisfaction, hearing your caller, operating in that sweet spot. It might be tempting to think there's nothing bad. Oh no. Let's talk about the dark side of calling. The worries of this life have a funny way of choking out our joy. Have you felt like your joy has been choked in the last week? Perhaps you've been grumpy to someone you shouldn't have been. Or maybe it's the deeper sense of sadness. Jesus talks about this in the parable of the sower of the seeds. In Matthew 13:27, he specifies that some of the seeds, some people, fall among the thorns, which he says those thorns are the worries of this life, thorns that choke things out. And this points to the idea that we're actually impacted by the people around us, the circumstances in our lives. And so our calling is impacted by the people around us and the environment that we surround ourselves in. And because calling is living out your skill set and your passion, you're good at it and you like it a lot, it's also easy to go above and beyond your boundaries and work overtime. Because if you feel called, when do you say no? How do you say no? And then it becomes poisonous, and you have job idolatry as the first thing. Viewing your work as the essence of who you are. This is not an immediate thing, right? Because no one wants to go after an idol intentionally. It's subtle and deceptive. Slowly, you begin viewing your work as having far greater importance than any other part of your life. Here's what it looks like. Work moves from being an expression of who you are, which is good, to the definition of who you are. Not so good. Work moves from being an expression of who you are to the definition of who you are. So the second kind of poisonous aspect to when work calling becomes toxic is workaholism. This is the one that makes me really uncomfortable, probably because it hits too close to home. So bear with me, I'm uncomfortable too. We often use this word as a joke to almost compliment someone, right? Like, oh, they're such a workaholic. But we kind of say it with a half smile because it's like, wow, they work really hard. But it's actually an addiction. It's a real addiction. Here's what addiction looks like, in case you're unaware. Early in the process, working makes you feel good. You become good at something. That feels nice. People know that you've become good at something. That feels really nice. And then it begins to change. At some point, work becomes less about feeling good and more about avoiding the bad feelings when you're not doing it. So when I go to get my phone fixed at the store and I don't have it in my hand and I'm waiting, I don't know what to do with myself. Have you ever had that experience? It's an odd thing because you're so used to when you're waiting, what do? You pull out your phone. I used to pull out a book. That's sort of a sad transition. And so in the same way, it's like a workaholism is if you've stopped doing it for 10 minutes and you're uncomfortable, that's not good. It's not good. And in many ways, this is a universally supported addiction, but it can destroy relationships and it can cause burnout. Now, here's the thing with burnout and people who feel called in the workplace. It's no longer, I don't like my job. It's, I don't know who I am anymore. It's a deeper issue. And it can cause physical, mental, emotional, spiritual sickness. So what can be done? What do we do about this? There are things, so not to worry. In my research, I found several aspects of things that you can do, and one of them is refueling. Refueling. Several participants described intentionally refueling for their emotional and physical needs. So I asked a doctor this, because doctors work crazy hours, and this doctor who felt called to work said this. When I asked him, what do you do when it gets hard in your job? He said, I refuel. I do things that are completely non-medical. I go for a walk, I shop, I watch TV, I go to the movies. I took several years of Italian at the university as a hobby. I want to do that. I even got an award for being outstanding. At this point, the doctor stands up when I'm interviewing him, goes over and shows me the award for most dedicated student. He says this just smiling. He says, I would go to classes in the evening. It was like I would take off my doctor coat and I would be somebody different, like Superman. Frank maintains the perspective that his work is an expression of his identity. It's a good expression. It's an act of worship, not the definition of who he is, not an idol, not an opportunity to be a workaholic. So we've talked about meaningful work. Again, we could have a whole talk about that. And work calling. We've talked about the fact that work is a privilege. I hope that we talk about that at some point. It's majorly in part of issues of diversity and inclusion. And we've talked a little bit about the dark side, although there's more. There's trouble in the force, right? What I'd like for us to do now is to take it home. Where are you today in this moment? Some of you are so burdened and multitasking even now. I see the glow of technology around here, right? I do. No judgment. But are you in a place of feeling God's calling? Are you actively searching for it? Are you feeling lost? Are you feeling hopeless? Are you buying into the lie that you might not ever feel a call? I promise you that's a lie. God is a communicative Lord, and he wants to share with you what he has in store for you. Don't give up. Don't give up. Don't give up. Remember that at the very core, calling involves a relationship with a caller. Be refreshed. Draw near to him, and he will draw near to you. He actually invites us to come to him. I'm really bad at RSVPing. I don't know if you are. I don't know if you naturally know how to RSVP. I just forget. In my mind, I do it, and then I forget to do it. Don't forget to RSVP to the invitation Christ has given you. Offer him your full plate. He is a good creator. He is a master artist. He is the best organizer, and he will help you tend your seeds. I say this knowing that it's easy to forget. It's easy to forget that in our most stressed out times, we need to stop and listen for the caller. I've recently experienced this yet again. Isn't it the lessons that we have to learn all the time, over and over? 3.5 years ago when I came to Biola, I finally survived the PhD program, and I felt like I was in paradise. Walking on this campus felt like a little piece of heaven, and I was so relieved to be in this community. The first time I came to a chapel on this campus, I cried. I could not believe we got to do this together. I realize after you do it for a while, it can seem mundane, but don't forget the specialness of it. But I was still in that zone of needing to prove myself all the time, so I said yes to every single opportunity that I was given. Yes, I'll do this. Yes, I'll do this. And none of them were opportunities I didn't want. They were all things I wanted. Finally, can you imagine after you graduate, getting a job and getting to do everything you've ever wanted? But last spring, I remember waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart beating like it was gonna burst out of my chest, and feeling very impressed by the Spirit that I was in danger of losing my calling because I was not even surviving. Like, there's surviving, which is not ideal, and then there's like not surviving. I was not surviving. I was not doing anything well, and I wasn't enjoying it. I wasn't caring. I wasn't stewarding the gift God had given me. So I started making some changes, but part of the problem is that course correction takes time. Have you ever had a bad habit that you have to change? Or that you should change? It takes time. It takes a conscious choice to put our lives in positions or places where we can feel God's pleasure. So how about you? What does your time look like these days? You're like, time? I don't have it. Is it filled with anxiety and stress? Do you have space to think and reflect? There are certainly seasons where you have to push harder than others, but be very careful that this season doesn't become a lifestyle. Put parameters that will tell you when it's become a lifestyle. So the other day, I was talking with my dad. I'm so in love with my husband. I just recently got married, and so it's really fun to see how my dad and my husband like each other. In fact, they call each other on the phone and talk. It's quite fun. And so the moments where I get to talk to just one of them at a time feels like this little special gift, and I get to hear what they're saying. And so I was talking to my dad, and I told him that I was feeling like my plate is overly full. But not just for the season. It's become overly full again for too long. Here's what he said. He said, "Daughter, I encourage you to stop and pray this. Lord, I thank you for the opportunities you've given me. Now I need your wisdom and your favor in knowing how to deal with them. Don't wait for the desire. Make this request of your Heavenly Father now. Just say it. Say those words. Offer up whatever you have." I wish I could tell you that I've figured this out. I don't. I don't know if I ever totally will, because I think it's a dynamic process, ever changing, so that we don't try to be in control, that we're constantly offering it to Christ. I do know it takes courage and vulnerability. Winston Churchill said this: courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. So carve out time today to sit down and listen for the voice of the Holy Spirit. It's not always obvious, but God, our caller, is always communicating with us.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.